welcome to another in the series of Café Insights. I'm Andrew Vine, the CEO of the Insight Bureau, and today I'm in conversation with Vijay. Hi, how are you?
Very good, thank you, Andrew.
Nice to see you in Singapore again. As a reminder, Vijay is the China Business and Finance Editor of The Economist, based in Shanghai, and he's also the author of the book Need, Speed and Greed: How the New Rules of Innovation Can Transform Businesses, Propel Nations, and Tame the World's Most Wicked Problems. It's a great title. Just recently, and the reason we're in conversation today, is you're also the author of The Economist's latest special report on business in China. So I wanted to ask you, it was 3 years ago that we last sat down and had a chat like this in conversation. And I remember you saying that the jury was a little bit out in terms of what kind of role China's going to play in the world economy. So it'd be interesting to hear over the course of the next couple of minutes how you see China has evolved and how it is evolving.
It is interesting. We're at a moment when China's economy seems to be at an inflection point. We've seen tremendous financial market volatility, stock market ructions, of course, that captured the world's attention, a small devaluation that was handled badly by the government and that led to a crisis of confidence. So at the moment, there's a prevailing mood of pessimism about China and its economy. And I think this is overdone. Actually, when you look at China, yes, there are things to worry about, to be sure, but a lot of these things arise from state-owned enterprises, the levels of debt, malinvestment, government involvement. But you have to remember that there are two Chinas. Yes, there is the state sector, which tends to be poorly run, but we have an incredibly vibrant private sector, and this has really come into its own over the last decade, and increasingly so in the last few years. If you look at the role of contribution to GDP, 2/3 of GDP growth comes from private companies. Almost all the jobs created in China's cities in the last decade were created by private companies. If you look at output, or indeed return on assets, on almost any measure, China's private sector firms outperform the state sector. So that's why I say there are really two Chinas, and one of those Chinas, the less important one, is hitting some troubles. But the more dynamic, entrepreneurial, innovative China is the private sector, and it's going from strength to strength.
It's interesting because your book says quite explicitly that innovation can propel nations. So recently even Xi Jinping said that innovation is at the core of China's future success. So how is China going to really take innovation as a success model?
Well, if we look to the future, innovation is going to be at the heart of what drives the Chinese economy forward. In the past, China relied on a model of investment that was state-driven, top-down, funneled lots of subsidized capital to state-owned enterprises, the property sector. That model of growth has outlived its usefulness. The government acknowledges this, and we're really seeing a transition to one that's led by consumption, one that's led by services sectors, which have long been repressed in China. And underneath all of this, of course, is a middle class that is surging. A tremendous rise in wealth that's happening in this decade in front of our eyes. And the greatest middle class in world history is unfolding right now in China. And it is going to be the private sector that drives us forward. And the economic growth, up to half the economic growth that China needs to sustain rates of 5 or 6% growth for the next 10 years, will come through innovation. And that innovation will come almost entirely from the private sector, both multinationals and Chinese companies, I must add, because there is an important role for foreign companies in China and a bright future for those companies from other countries that can adapt to the new realities of the Chinese marketplace.
China's at the forefront of much of research and development in the area of science and chemistry and technology. How much is that driving the economy as well?
On the question of science and technology-based innovation, because there are different kinds of innovation, China has some room further to grow. Where China really excels is in efficiency-driven innovation, that is manufacturing areas, and consumer markets innovation, where business model innovation can lead to wonderful new products and services, be that the Xiaomi smartphone or WeChat, the online social media services. There are hundreds of examples like this, where in many ways China is at the world forefront of e-commerce, social media, social commerce, and setting trends that are global. But when it comes to the cutting edge of science and technology, China has some ways to go. We do have some examples of companies. Huawei is the telecoms company. We have Beijing Genomics, or BGI, which is the world's leading genomics institute. So there are examples, but certainly China is nowhere near where the United States is on this front.
No. Is there a possibility, do you think, that China will be the great disruptor globally across lots of different industries?
If the private sector is given room to grow, if we see further liberalization, for example, of the state sector, and opening up of the services sector, if China gives that room for the private sector to continue to grow and innovate, then I think we're going to increasingly see Chinese companies go global.
Right.
And as they do, some of them will prove disruptors to global industries, upending them and bringing perhaps new and better products and services to global consumers. So there will be winners and losers from this.
Yes.
But also Chinese companies are going overseas so they can learn.
Yep.
They want to learn how to do brands, which Chinese companies don't do well.
Because it's fair to say they haven't done very well to date going global as organizations.
No, they have not. But the first great wave of globalization was really the state-owned enterprises that went looking for resources, oil and minerals and agricultural land, and sometimes they were inefficient and certainly sometimes they were corrupt. And so there is a backlash against this sort of globalization. What we're now seeing is a new wave of private sector companies, and what they want is they want to invest in technologies, they want to get global talent, and they want to bring these back to serve a booming consumer market in China and ultimately to go back and serve the world. I think that kind of globalization should be welcomed by the world.
Well, I was going to say, if China's successful in what it sets out to achieve through its private sector, should the West be fearful of a stronger China like this, or is it really in its interest?
I think, broadly speaking, it's in the world's interest. Interdependence is really the story of the rise of China. The greatest beneficiaries of China's rise have probably been consumers around the world. Why can you buy cheap things at Walmart? It's because they're made in China. Or why can you buy phenomenally high-quality iPhones? Because they're made by Foxconn, a Taiwanese company in Shenzhen, in southern China. So China's rise has greatly benefited the world already. This is a question of the next phase or evolution of that growth, and how will the rise of innovative China also produce marvels that can help the world while disrupting industries and challenging companies that might have grown inefficient in the West that needed to be shaken up.
Well, Vijay, this is great to talk to you. I think your report comes out at just the right time as we're all getting rather pessimistic about China. This is quite a good picture about how China may rise further and be a driver for our economic growth. Thank you very much indeed, Vijay.
Thank you.